The train screeched to a halt, sending echoes into the fog-laced valley. Rain pattered onto the rusting corrugated roof of the forgotten station, nestled between dense woods and a cliff that dropped into roaring waters. She stood there, one hand on her swollen belly, the other gripping the handle of a vintage suitcase, more symbolic than practical. Her breath curled in the air. Her name was Elena Moreau, and until an hour ago, she was Mrs. Gregory Moreau, the wife of a man whose net worth dripped with golden zeros. Gregory hadn't even looked back when he tossed the suitcase onto the gravel platform. His final words echoed in her ears like a cruel bell toll. "This was your mistake, not mine. Figure it out." He didn't wait for a reply. The train door hissed shut. Within seconds, the thunder of the locomotive faded into the mist, and silence returned like a ghost. Elena looked around. The station seemed abandoned, as though time had passed it by. A cracked wooden sign barely hanging on one nail read, "Wraithmore Halt." No ticket counter, no soul in sight, and the road leading away was more a memory than a path. The chill in the air crept under her coat and settled into her bones. Her legs trembled, not just from fatigue, but from the weight of disbelief. This wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment, premeditated and precise. Gregory, the man she had once loved for his passion and intellect, had turned cold ever since the news of the pregnancy. A child didn't fit into his empire of sterile perfection. She had sensed the distance growing like mold in a sealed room. But this was brutality cloaked in calculated elegance. She eased herself onto a cracked bench, her hand protective over her belly. No signal. Her phone was dead. Gregory had ensured that. The battery was missing. An owl hooted from the trees. Dusk painted the sky in hues of burnt copper and fading violet. Somewhere in the trees, something moved, a rustle that stopped her breath. Before fear could take hold, a faint glow appeared down the trail leading into the woods. A lantern. Footsteps. She stood, unsure whether to flee or beg. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall, lean, and cloaked in layers of wool. A wide-brimmed hat concealed most of his face, but not the kindness in his voice. "You all right, miss?" he asked, the lantern swaying gently in his grasp. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Not in your condition." Elena hesitated. Everything about him seemed out of place, like he belonged to another time. His coat was stitched by hand, boots muddy, and his accent quaint. But it wasn't threatening. It was warm. "My husband left me here," she said, the words falling heavier than she expected. The man didn't blink. "Then he's a damn fool." She allowed herself the smallest smile. He extended a hand, and after a second's pause, she took it. His name, she learned, was Elias. He didn't ask many questions, just guided her through the woods with careful steps, making sure she didn't stumble. They arrived at a cottage carved into the hill, chimney puffing gentle smoke, warm light glowing from the windows. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and cedar. A fire crackled. The interior was modest but rich in character. Bookshelves laden with ancient tomes, oil paintings of stars and forests, and curious devices that seemed half scientific, half mystical. "Tea," he offered, already pouring from a brass kettle. She nodded. It felt surreal, like being plucked from a nightmare into a fairy tale. As days passed, Elias's presence became her sanctuary. He never pried, but listened when she chose to speak. He helped her write letters she couldn't send, cooked meals she hadn't tasted in months, and taught her to find herbs in the woods to ease the backaches and nausea. Elena asked him once why he lived alone in a place so far removed from the world. "I was part of it once," he said, sipping his tea. "Then the world took too much. Now I live where it can't take more." She understood. And yet, he gave so freely. One stormy night, as lightning lit up the sky, Elena doubled over in pain. It was early, too early. Fear surged through her like a flood. Elias didn't panic. He moved like a man who had done this before. Sheets, water, herbs, fire. He whispered to her, held her hand, and guided her through the hours of agony and tears. And when dawn broke, a baby cried, a fierce, determined sound that echoed through the cottage like a blessing. A girl. Tears streamed down Elena's face as Elias placed the child into her arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, as though it were a sacred truth. They named her Aurora. News of Elena's disappearance soon made headlines. Gregory spun a narrative of concern and confusion. But investigators uncovered discrepancies. Surveillance. Witnesses. And when Elena's lawyer released her prepared statement, including the evidence she'd stashed in her coat lining, texts, recordings, and financial manipulation, Gregory's empire began to collapse like a sandcastle against the tide. Still, Elena remained hidden. She declined interviews, rejected publishers, ignored the vultures clawing for her story. She was no longer someone's wife, no longer a pawn in the billionaire's game. She was Aurora's mother. She was herself. Elias remained her silent guardian, her friend, her mystery. Until one day, months later, she opened the attic door in the cottage, and what she found changed everything. The attic creaked beneath her as she ascended, a thin shaft of morning light piercing through a circular window coated in dust. Elena hadn't been in this part of the house before. Elias had gently discouraged it, always saying it was just old junk and broken clocks. But that morning, driven by a strange restlessness and the curious gleam in Aurora's newborn eyes, she climbed the narrow steps alone while Elias was out gathering herbs from the forest. She reached the final stair and pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges like something ancient stirring. The attic was larger than she expected, cloaked in soft shadow, filled with crates and old trunks, dusty canvases leaning against the beams, and stacks of yellowed notebooks bound with leather cords. One corner of the attic stood out, a polished chest, out of place amidst the clutter. Unlike the rest, it was pristine, almost reverent in its presentation. A symbol was etched onto the wood, an infinity loop intertwined with a quill. Elena's fingers hovered above the latch. She hesitated. The air in the attic had shifted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. With a soft click, she opened it. Inside were layers of carefully folded clothes, not woolen and rustic like Elias wore, but tailored suits, sleek and modern. Beneath them, photographs, newspapers, credentials. One name repeated across them, Dr. Elias Thorne, renowned physicist, vanished 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Elena's breath caught. The articles detailed a man once celebrated in the world's scientific elite. A revolutionary mind who pioneered theories in temporal energy, black hole trajectories, and something called existential resonance, a field so niche and obscure that even top universities called it poetic insanity. Then, without warning, he vanished, shortly after presenting a paper that warned of a catastrophe born not of war, but of time itself. Elena sifted through more papers, schematics for machines she couldn't comprehend, handwritten journals filled with equations, and letters addressed to someone named Margot. The tone in the letters changed over time. The early ones were full of hope and plans. The later ones, grief. She turned to a photo tucked between two journals. A woman, smiling in a sunlit garden, holding a baby. The resemblance hit Elena like a sudden gust. Margot looked like her. Uncannily so. And the baby in her arms had the same piercing eyes as Aurora. "Elena," came Elias's voice from behind her. Not loud, not angry, just tired. She turned, the photograph trembling in her hands. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" He stepped into the attic slowly, like a man walking into a memory. "Because I stopped being that person the day time took everything I loved." She waited. The silence between them stretched, full of tension and unspoken things. Then Elias crossed the room and sat on an old crate. His eyes, always steady, seemed haunted now. "I built something I shouldn't have," he began, voice raw. "It was never meant to be used, just a theory, an idea born from grief. But when Margot fell ill, when doctors gave us no hope, I broke every law of nature to try and save her. I built a rift, a sliver between dimensions, between timelines. I thought I could move across time, not backward, not forward, but sideways, into a world where she lived." Elena listened, heart pounding. "I stepped through," he said, "and found something unexpected. A world almost the same as mine, but not quite. She was there, yes, but she didn't know me. She'd never met me. She was married, happy, and she had a child who looked just like our daughter would have." His voice cracked. He turned away. "I stayed long enough to know I couldn't steal her from that life. I came back, but the process damaged the portal. It closed, collapsed. I was stranded in my own timeline, alone. So I left it all. Came here." Elena clutched the photo, realizing the impossible truth. "You think I'm her?" "I don't know," he whispered. "You look like her, speak like her, but you're not her. And yet, from the moment I saw you at that station alone, cast aside, something in me woke up again." She stepped forward, still processing the magnitude of his confession. "So what now?" He looked up at her, tears shimmering in his eyes. "Now, I protect this second chance. Not for me. For you. For Aurora. If I tried to explain it all, the world would bury it again, or worse, weaponize it. I gave up that life. But I can give you safety. Sanctuary. The floor beneath them seemed suddenly sacred. Two broken souls, stitched together by fate and silence and something inexplicable. Elena didn't run. She sat beside him and placed the photograph between them. I don't care where you came from, she said softly. You were there when it mattered most. That's what counts. Elias smiled faintly, the ghost of something long buried returning. Then let's never speak of the attic again. The days grew longer. Aurora began to laugh, her giggles echoing through the trees. Elias planted a garden for her, each herb marked by its name and healing property. Elena, meanwhile, wrote, not for the world, but for her daughter. Letters, memories, stories of pain and survival, of betrayal and strange redemption. One morning, a drone hovered outside the cottage, blinking red, scanning. Elena froze as she saw the corporate logo, MCore Dynamics, Gregory's AI division. Elias acted swiftly. He pressed a concealed latch behind the fireplace, revealing a tunnel. Take Aurora. Go. Follow the path. Don't stop. But what about you? I'll draw them off. I know how they think. His voice was steel again, the man from the journals. She didn't argue. The urgency in his tone carved through her fear. She wrapped Aurora tight and kissed Elias's hand before disappearing into the shadows of the tunnel. Elias stepped outside, unarmed, calm, and eyes burning with the weight of all he'd lost and all he'd sworn to protect. As the drone's lens focused on him, a voice crackled through its speaker. Dr. Thorne, we've been looking for you. He smiled faintly. Then you found me. But I'm not coming back. The drone hovered uncertainly. You built a portal, the voice said. You abandoned it. We need it now. I buried it for a reason. And as the wind stirred the trees, the drone's light blinked rapidly, scanning deeper into the terrain. The countdown to something had begun. Deep within the tunnel, Elena emerged into a glade, clutching Aurora, breath ragged. She could still hear the faint buzz of the drone behind her. But ahead, there was only peace. And just beyond the clearing, the glint of a strange door embedded in the earth. A door pulsing softly, as though waiting to open. Elena stood frozen, clutching Aurora against her chest, eyes locked on the strange metallic door embedded in the hillside. It pulsed with a faint cerulean light, humming like a heartbeat, alive and waiting. The air around it shimmered faintly, distorting the trees beyond like a mirage. Something about it stirred a memory, not her own, but something deeper, ancestral, like the blood in her veins recognized the call of something ancient. Behind her, the forest whispered with urgency. The drone's buzzing had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of wind weaving through leaves. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate, holding its breath as mother and child stood on the cusp of something greater than understanding. She stepped forward, drawn by instinct more than thought. The door, impossibly smooth and free of any handle or keyhole, responded to her presence. It bloomed open silently, revealing a passage carved in liquid glass and stone, spiraling downward into a warm, golden glow. The scent of ozone, lavender, and something electric drifted out to greet her. The hum grew louder, resonating with her heartbeat. Aurora stirred in her arms, eyes wide and unblinking, but calm, as though she too understood this was not a place of danger, but destiny. Elena hesitated only once more. She looked back toward the path, toward the place she'd left Elias behind. A swell of emotion caught in her throat, gratitude, fear, grief, and something she couldn't name. The man who had found her at her lowest, who had asked for nothing but given everything. The man who carried the scars of worlds and still chose to save hers. She whispered, "Thank you," to the wind and stepped into the light. The door closed behind her with the finality of a heartbeat. Above ground, Elias stood in the clearing near the cottage, surrounded by 5 black-clad figures, their faces obscured by mirrored helmets. The lead one stepped forward, a sleek device in his gloved hand glowing red. "You knew this day would come," the voice crackled through a vocoder. "I counted on it," Elias replied calmly. "You'll come with us. You'll finish the machine. The board has approved full activation." He smiled, not in surrender, but in defiance. "There's nothing left to activate." The man raised the device, and in an instant, a bolt of energy surged toward Elias. But before it could strike, a shockwave erupted from the earth. Light shot skyward from the place where the strange door had opened. The pulse knocked everyone to the ground. Birds scattered. The trees groaned. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. When the soldiers stood again, Elias was gone. In the chamber below, Elena found herself in a place beyond reason. The tunnel had opened into a sanctum of impossible architecture. Walls carved from obsidian and crystal, filled with floating shapes and orbs that responded to thought. The air vibrated with knowledge, memories, lives lived and unlived. She stepped forward, and the chamber reacted, forming around her like a living organism recognizing its new heart. A console rose from the ground, a curved pedestal etched with symbols that glowed when she touched them. Words filled the air, not spoken but felt. You are the keeper now. Visions unfolded before her. Timelines, fractured and tangled, like rivers branching through eternity. She saw herself on train platforms in other worlds. In some, she never met Gregory. In others, Aurora never existed. And in one, she saw Elias with Margot, laughing in a sunlit garden, the future stolen from him by ambition and grief. And then she saw the cost. The damage done by the rift Elias had created. The imbalance. The seekers who wanted to claim it, mold time to their will, erase what they deemed unnecessary. But there was another choice. The chamber showed her the way to seal the rift, not by force, but by anchoring it to something incorruptible. A bond unbreakable. A child born not out of perfection, but out of pain, redemption, and love. Aurora. The infant reached out toward the console. Her tiny hand brushed the light, and in that instant, the entire chamber pulsed with warmth. A sound like the turning of the universe itself echoed all around them. Above, in the ruins of the cottage, the soldiers looked skyward as the earth opened once more, light shooting through the trees, arcing into the clouds. Time shuddered. The rift closed. Not destroyed, but healed, reborn as something protected, sacred. Elias awoke in a field beneath starlight. But it wasn't the world he'd left. He stood slowly, dazed. The air smelled of jasmine. The sky above was unfamiliar, painted with constellations he didn't recognize. A small cottage stood in the distance, lanterns glowing in the windows. He approached, unsure. The door opened before he could knock. And there, standing at the threshold, was Margot. But not the Margot he had once known. This one was older, wiser. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I've been waiting," she whispered. Somewhere in a different timeline, Elena held Aurora beneath a tree blooming with silver blossoms. Her hand rested over her daughter's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of a future untouched by greed or regret. The sanctuary was now hers to protect. And she would do so, not as a victim, not as a woman forgotten on a platform, but as the beginning of something new. Gregory Moreau's empire would soon crumble completely. Investigations, whistleblowers, courtrooms lined with shattered contracts and testimonies of ruin. But his name would fade. The world forgets tyrants when their stories end in silence. But Elena's story would whisper through generations, untold, unseen, yet echoed in those who feel lost and find themselves in the darkest moments. In every mother who chooses courage over comfort, in every soul who turns pain into purpose. And in a hidden grove beneath the canopy of stars not yet named, a child would grow, brilliant, wild, and fearless. A child born not into the world she was given, but into the one her mother forged.